Shalom, this is Rabbi Henry of Messianic Congregation Shemayim, and I told you I'd be back today. I'm late. What else is new? Hey, if at first you don't succeed, as the Three Stooges said, keep on sucking until you do succeed. But I'm here finally. Had a little bit of a setback on my way here. So we were talking yesterday about the creation of the land of Israel. We're now celebrating the 70th year anniversary of the modern state of the nation of Israel. And it's a wonderful, monumentous thing that we have before us to see this little tiny nation, a little bit smaller than the size of New Jersey, and all of the turmoil and trouble that they're up against on a regular basis. Most of the Arab Muslim world is against them and desires for their destruction. Most of the UN resolutions in modern times, specifically, that have come against any nation, the majority of them are against Israel. There's more UN resolutions against Israel than there are any other nation, more against Israel than Syria, than Russia, than China, than Iraq, Iran, any of those Middle Eastern nations, Sudan. And of course, we know all the trouble that has happened in Sudan. And they have faced nothing but aggravation, turmoil, trial, and tribulation since day one. I wanted to get more specific today. I don't think I'm gonna do as long today as I did yesterday. I'm trying to cut it down to the next time we gather. I'm going to be talking more from a biblical perspective. We're talking from the perspective of history. We're dealing with the issue of the understanding the Israeli Palestinian, quote unquote, Palestinian conflict from a biblical and historical perspective. And I don't know if any one of you are aware, but there have never been and never will be an independent people group ever known as Palestinians. They have never existed in time. They have never had a capital to themselves. We talked about where the word Palestine comes from, I think yesterday, but Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD, just as a brief review if I didn't cover it yesterday, incensed by what was known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. Bar Kokhba was a Jewish general who was declared to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiva, one of the leading rabbis of his day. He revolted against Rome in hopes to throw them out and gain Israel independence. I didn't succeed, obviously, back then. And Hadrian, so outraged and incensed by this revolt, decided that he was going to eradicate the memory of the Jewish people and disassociate the memory of the Jewish people from the land of Israel. And he renamed it after their arch enemies, the Philistines, and called it Palestina. Of course, it's been anglicized since then, and now it's called Palestine. And from there on in, it was specifically a region. It wasn't about a people group. And of course, he moved his own people in there to inhabit the land, people who were loyal to him. And that's the way it has been for centuries. We know that during the time of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, as I said briefly yesterday, that they taxed the people based upon the amount of trees they had, and they deforested Israel and made it into a desert and barren wasteland with swamps, malaria-infested swamps. And the Jewish people back then in the late 1800s, the Ottoman Turkish Empire was from 1517 to 1917 until the British Mandate, and then the Brits and the French took over until 1948, May 14th, 1948, when Israel gained independence. It was declared a homeland, not a country, but a homeland for the Jewish people by Lord Balfour of England, who was a parliamentarian and, of course, a lord in the Parliament of Israel. I mean, of England. And he came up with what was known as the Balfour Declaration, which declared that Israel should have a homeland, not a country at the time, but in preparation for them to eventually inhabit the land and become a country. And that's how they became what they are today. And of course, the vote was taken May 15th, 1948, the day after they became a nation. All of the five surrounding nations, Arab Muslim nations, descended upon them to destroy them and wipe them from the face of the earth. The quote that they gave was, "This would be like the Mongolian massacres. We will wipe them off and drive them into the sea." Of course, a year later, all the Arab nations were filing and suing for peace because they didn't win. And I'm glad they didn't. All right, so I'm going to be reading, I don't often do this, but this is a wonderful little book. It's called Israel 101. It's put out by a group called Stand With Us. And they have some wonderful information in here. And to synopsize and make this a little easier, because I try to remember to use my notes, but I always forget. But I know that we're also on a time limit. You don't want to be here all day long listening to my dribble. So to keep it synopsized, I'm going to read portions of this. And I would suggest you go online. Again, it's called Israel 101, and it's produced by a group called Stand With Us. And they produce wonderful material with amazing historical facts in a very synopsized manner, so that you can really get an understanding of what is going on and what has gone over historically. And they update this on a regular basis. Again, Israel 101, Stand With Us. And I'm sure you can just Google that, because Google knows everything, as you all know. So I'm going to just read some of this material, not all of it, but read some of it concerning the issue of the restoring the Jewish homeland. The Jews are indigenous to the Palestinian region. And again, we talked about that. It's a region. It's not about a people group. And have lived there continuously for over 3,000 years. Even after the Roman conquest in the first century, Jewish communities remained and periodically flourished, and exiled Jews returned in waves of immigration. It's always been the Jewish desire to come back to the land of Israel and inhabit the land and be a people group there. They feel, of course, that they are, back then specifically, that they were in the diaspora as well, and they wanted to come back to their homeland. All right. But the Jews became an oppressed minority in their homeland, and in their numbers they rose and fell, depending upon the kindness or the cruelty of the region's different rulers. In the 1700s and the early 1800s, crippling taxes, discrimination and persecution, and natural disasters brought the Jewish community to a new low. And what they mean by that is, in Islam, there is a status known as dehimitude, D-H-I, dehimitude. And that basically means that you can live, if you are a Christian or a Jew, in a Muslim society, as long as you submit to being a slave and pay what's known as the jizya, the exorbitant tax that they have to pay in order to live in the land. And so they were taxed beyond any imagination. And of course, there were other rules as well concerning the jizya, and they were known as the Dehimis. And they had to live according to the rules of Islam. They couldn't practice their faith. They couldn't do whatever they needed to do to properly educate their children in their faith. They had to submit to Islam in all areas. If they didn't convert and they paid the tax and became slaves. And so, of course, under the Ottoman Turkish Empire, that's what happened. They became slaves, paid the jizya, and became the dehimitude. But in the mid-1800s, I know I said I'm going to stay on my notes, I'll try. A new energy seized the Jewish community in Palestine. With help from philanthropists like Sir Moses Montefiore and donations from ordinary Jews around the world, Jewish people branched out from all the cities and began purchasing land and building farms, villages, and schools. More exiles returned. By 1854, Jews were the largest religious group in Jerusalem. By 1870, they were once again the majority of the city's population. And why do we know that? Because we have, actually, I have books in my library that talk about, published by the Brits, that actually talk about the census and the population of the land at the time. I will read from you another time a book called The War of the Jews, written by Lieutenant Colonel, I think it's Lieutenant Colonel Moshe Perlman, and he gives some tremendous historical facts. He wrote this book in 1950, right after Israel became a nation in 1948. They were young and energetic idealists imbued with Western political principles and dreams of a national liberation that was sweeping across Europe. Of course, remember, the Jews were in persecution under the pogroms of the Russians. They experienced the Spanish Inquisition. They experienced, of course, persecution in Russia, in Portugal. I mean, all over the world, they were experiencing persecution. Since the days of Moses, the Jews have been persecuted. And that has gone on for thousands of years, as we've said. The Jews have always been thrown out of the lands that they've inhabited. They have become part of society in many different ways. Whatever land they come into, they become part of society, become tradesmen and craftsmen, and pick up themselves by their bootstraps. And for all intents and purposes, hi, Michelle. Hi, Corin. Good to see you. She writes so much propaganda. Yes, I guess so. We're going to try and get that weeded out today, some propaganda. And so when they started realizing that there was a fervor to come back to the land and a potential, again, we talked about this, they started buying land from the absentee Ottoman Turkish landlords. Hi, David Falk. And for $1,000 an acre, the most fertile land in America was being sold for $110 an acre. And in Israel, they were buying malaria-infested swamps and deserts for $1,000 an acre from these absentee Ottoman Turkish landlords, as they strafed the land and ruined it. The Jews came back. Of course, there were donations from all over the world, European and American Jews who were trying to invest into the idea of a homeland for the Jews, because all they had ever experienced was suffering and persecution and being exiled. There was a massive population of Jewish people in Persia and in what we call Iran today, very thriving population, until, of course, Muslim reign changed its desire to purge Persia of the Jewish population there. So between 1882 and 1914, a new kind of Jewish immigrant arrived, the lovers of Zion and other early Zionists who laid groundwork for the modern Jewish state. These immigrants sought freedom from the oppression and persecution that had plagued Jews in Europe and the Middle East. We've already covered that. The returning Jews had no powerful nation to help them. They had no one who would allow them armament. They didn't give them funding. They came in and funded themselves. They had no weapons. They were penniless, just as the Jews came from Nazi Germany with only the clothes on their back, if they were lucky. The land was only sparsely populated, and much of it had become barren. The Jews wanted to restore the land's once famous fertility and build villages and communities where none existed. And as we said yesterday, they came back, they started building the land, they started populating, they built cities, they built roads, they built infrastructure, they built hospitals. They ended up repopulating the land and making not only the land habitable, but a place where there was employment, a place where there was prosperity. And Muslims from all over the Middle East started coming in, pouring in, realizing they could make a living and provide and take care of their families. And of course, like I said yesterday, it wasn't hard before long where they became outnumbered by the masses of Muslims. There's approximately 1.8 billion Muslims in the world today, 15 million Jews at best. It doesn't take much to outnumber us. It doesn't take much at all. So the region was an impoverished backwater property owned by the Ottoman Turkish Empire. In 1880, there were only an estimated 250,000 to 400,000 people, many of whom were also recent arrivals who had no sense of unity or ethnic and national identity. Their allegiance was to the Ottoman Empire, their religious group, their clan, or their local community. The country, this is a quote from what's known as the Civil Administration of Palestine to the League of Nations in June 1921. The country was and is now undeveloped and underpopulated. If this was so important to the Muslims at that time, why was this the case? Again, this is the Civil Administration of Palestine to the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations. There are large cultivatable areas that are left untilled. The summits and the slopes of the hills are admirably suited to the growth of trees, but there are no forests. Miles of sand dunes that could be redeemed are untouched. That's the report. They have no desire to be biased. They're just making a report because they were in, of course, in 1917, when the Ottoman Turkish Empire was dissolved, they took control of the area, and they were just giving a report. The area included such an assortment of ethnic groups that over 50 different languages were spoken. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, 1911. So it was a diverse place. Jews were making the land habitable. People were coming back. And of course, people from all over the Middle East were coming in. The Jews legally bought land. This land they developed primarily from absentee Ottoman Turkish Empire landlords. Most of it was uncultivated and swamp land or sand dunes. This is known as the Hope-Simpson Report, 1930. The Jews paid high prices for the land, and in addition, they paid certain occupants of those lands a considerable amount of money, which they were not legally bound to pay. Again, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, the desire was, we'll go ahead and sell them this land, and then we'll, after they die in this uncultivated land, we'll take it back from them. Of the total of 418,000 dunams, that's a quarter acres, acquired by Jews in Palestine between 1878 and 1914, 58% was sold by non-Palestinian Arab absentee landlords. So they're not Palestinian dwellers, they're absentee Ottoman Turkish Muslim landlords. And 36% by Palestinian absentee landlords, for a total of 94%. So that meant they didn't live in the land, they just owned the land, and they decided they were going to get rid of it at an exorbitant price, and then, of course, hope that the Jews would die. This is according to the Palestinian American historian Rashid Khalidi. In the Peel Commission report in 1937, Arab claims that the Jews have obtained too large a proportion of good land cannot be maintained. Much of the land now carrying orange groves was sand dunes or swamps and uncultivated when it was bought. That's according to the Peel Commission report in 1937. So we see that, again, the idea was they wanted the land back now that the Jews developed it, now that the Jewish people came back, because this was their hope, to come back and cultivate the land and live in Israel and enjoy the land and the blessings that the Lord had promised them to inherit the land. For those of you who aren't familiar, Israel is the only nation, the Jews, who have ever lost their land, language, cohesion as a people, have ever been dispossessed from the land and have been scattered all over the world, who have ever come back to the land as the same people group with the same language. Not only has it happened to the Jews, it's happened to them twice. And so, of course, we know when they came back in 1948. Of course, they came back after the revolt of Judah Maccabee, and they came back and rebuilt. They came back, of course, before that. They came back with Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel, after the decree of Cyrus. And then, of course, they lost their land. They were in the land, but they weren't the majority. They were under the occupation of many different groups. They were under the occupation of the Syrians. And, of course, that's where Antiochus Epiphanes comes in. And many of them were expelled, but some of them were left. And yet they still maintained their identity. So let me just go ahead and say maybe 2.5 times. They weren't expelled from the land, but they were certainly under the oppression of the conquering Syrians at the time. And then, of course, in 70 AD, they were expelled from the land again under Titus, and 135, it was completely, the Jews were thrown out under Hadrian. And they've had some odds against them that no other people group in the world have ever faced, and have come back as the same people group in the same land with the same language. I find if that's not a miracle, nothing is. And that's because, and tomorrow, or maybe not tomorrow, depends if I can get to this, but soon we'll deal with this from a very biblical perspective and help us understand why that is the case. I think I talked to you about this, but let me read it to you anyways, just as a synopsis, because he does a good job here. From the 1st century, when Rome renamed the Jewish state Palestine, until the mid-20th century, Palestine was associated with Jews and the Jewish homeland. The Jews in the area used the term Palestine for their symphonies, newspapers, other enterprises. The Jerusalem Post was at one time called the Palestinian Gazette, I think it was. Oh, the Palestine Post, I'm sorry. There was the Palestine Post, later the Jerusalem Post, the Palestine Symphony Orchestra. By the way, these were Jewish organizations. The Palestine Electric Company, the Palestine Potash Company, and others. There was no association with Palestine specifically in relationship to the Arab Muslim population. Arabs and Jews who lived in Palestine, or the Palestine Mandate, all had Palestinian Mandate passports, but Arab residents were generally referred to as Arabs, not Palestinians. There are no indigenous, and that's where the lie comes in. There are no indigenous people group known as Palestinians. They've never had a country. They've never had in history a capital. They don't exist. They don't actually come into existence until Yasser Arafat, I think it's in 1963, declares the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Palestine is a term. All right, so I'm sorry, let me read this again. Palestine, it says here, is a term the Zionists invented. Our country for centuries was part of Syria. It's funny because when you look at even, for example, of course, they're saying that they were part of Syria before it became Palestine. Jordan was promised to the Jews under the mandate of the Balfour Declaration. It was called Transjordan, and that was part of that whole promise, of course, Gaza as well, until it eventually was whittled back to 17.5% of the original landmass promised to them. When Israel received the land, the portion that they finally inherited, that section, which is now called the West Bank, was actually under the rule of Jordan. Jordan occupied and had full control of that land. Gaza, as it's called now, is and was under the control of Egypt in totality. They had total control. Where was world outcry saying, give the poor Palestinians back their land? Give them back where did the world, and when, at what time, does anyone ever remember the world saying, we need those Jordanians to give those Palestinians back their land, or we need the Egyptians to give them back their land? Because they didn't exist. There was no outcry for the land. All right. So, our country for centuries was part of Syria. This is the local Arab leader. I'm going to butcher his name, forgive me. Anibay Abdul Hadi to the Peel Commission in 1937. Before and after World War II, anti-Semites in Europe and the U.S. told Jews to get out and go back to Palestine. So they wanted the Jews out of their country, out of Europe, and they told them to go back. Where was Palestine? Israel. And they were basically telling them, go back to your land. After 1948, when the reborn Jewish state took the name Israel, the term Palestine went out of usage to refer to Israel. In 1964, the term was revived when Egypt, all right, so I said 63, I was wrong, helped organize the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. By the 1970s, the term came to be associated with Arabs, not Jews, under, of course, the leadership of Yasser Arafat, who never wanted peace but wanted the destruction of the Jewish people. If anyone is skeptical, I have read many times the charter of the Hamas, Fatah, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, Hamas considers itself a franchise of the Muslim Brotherhood. And just go online, you can read the charter. It's very simple. And you'll see that they both declare that the destruction of the Jewish people and the Jewish state is their goal. There is no desire to live in peace. They have no desire to live in peace with anybody. They just want to destroy the Jews from the face of this land. And everything is basically a front for the purpose of promoting their agenda. Supposedly, Fatah and Hamas were trying to work together to have a coalition government, which we know never lasted. And Mahmoud Abbas, of course, is in charge of Fatah, and they've had a major split, and they're always at odds with each other. But it's the same thing. They desire the destruction of the Jewish people. They don't want to live in peace. When the Jews left Gaza, they left and totally left the land. They gave it to the Palestinians, quote unquote, and they left them hydroponic gardens. They left them wonderful places, roads and schools, and the synagogues. They destroyed the synagogues, burnt everything that related to the Jewish people, and basically strafed the hydroponic gardens and the desalinization plants, and just destroyed everything. Anything that the Jews put their hands to, they destroyed and robbed and pillaged, and they basically turned the Gaza Strip into the world's largest terrorist camp. That's all they basically did. And of course, you ask the question, if they want a Palestinian state, if they want to live in peace and have their section, why aren't any Jews allowed to come to Gaza and live in Gaza as citizens? But there's plenty of Arabs. Matter of fact, they get into the place where they're starting to threaten the population of the Jewish people in outnumbering them. Plenty of Arabs are living in Israel as Israeli citizens. Arabs, Muslims who are in the Knesset and work in Israel as doctors and have universities. I don't see one Jewish university in Gaza. I don't see anything like that happening. And they have total control. Total control. Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. His wife lives, I don't know if she still does, but she lived in France as a very wealthy woman because all the money that was poured into them by America and the United Nations and other international groups. He died a billionaire. None of that money went back to his people. Why weren't they busy building infrastructure and making sure their people had all that they needed instead of investing in bombs and a way to destroy the Jewish people? That's all they have ever done, digging tunnels and trying to destroy Jews. When is the last time anyone has ever seen a Jew strap a bomb onto himself, walk into a crowded Muslim marketplace and say, Jehovah is greater, boom? Doesn't exist. Hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. I mean, at least that I have seen, unless you get a wacko who does that. But that's not the norm. That is the norm of Islam. And we'll be talking about that as well, not only dealing with this from a biblical perspective, but I will be giving quotes from the Quran that you can take to the bank and you can go look them up yourself. I'll give you the sources. I'll give you the address in the Quran. And no, they are not taken out of context. I've read the Quran twice. Let's get back to this because this is good material. Between 1881 and 1906, Jews in Russia were slaughtered. Their homes and towns were destroyed. Their women were raped. In Kishinev, the mob was led by priests, and the general cry, "Kill the Jews," was taken up over the entire city. The Jews were slaughtered like sheep. Babies were literally torn to pieces by the frenzied and bloodthirsty mob. New York Times, April 28th, 1903. Like the miserable dog without an owner, he, the Jew, is kicked by one because he crosses a Muslim's path, and cuffed by another because he cries out to seek redress. He is afraid lest it bring worse upon him. He thinks it better to endure than to live in the expectation of his complaint being revenged upon him. That's the British consul in Jerusalem, William T. Young, to Colonel Patrick Campbell, May 25th, 1839. The Jews had nowhere to go. So what should we do? Lay down and die? Unfortunately, many of them did. And that happened under the leadership of the Russians in Spain. It happened in, of course, Germany. It happened during the, I'm having a mental block here because I'm getting old. The Inquisitions. I think there was 11 Inquisitions. They killed millions of Jews along the way, trying to get to Jerusalem. They had many Inquisitions that they just slaughtered entire villages of Jews. Where were we to go? Tell me, where is it that there's a safe place? I know, France. No, that didn't work. How about England? Didn't work there either. They were persecuted in England. I know, Russia. Nope, didn't work in Russia. Where were we to go? Well, the Lord made it very clear. We were to go back home. And that's what we did. And the world didn't like it. And it's not because they wanted the land of Israel. It's because they wanted the destruction of the Jewish people. And so when we look at all these things, we see that it had nothing to do with the Muslim Palestinians having their land taken from them. And the oppressive Jewish people came in and they slaughtered the Muslims. It didn't happen that way. Jews were being slaughtered all over the world and had nowhere to go. They came back to the only place that the Lord had promised them, and he fulfilled his promise and set them back on their land for the second time. Let me read you a quote from an account of the early Zionists settling in 1885. Nobody knows all the hardships, the sickness, the wretchedness that they, the early Zionists, underwent. No observer from afar can feel what it is like to be without a drop of water for days, to lie for months in cramped tents, visited by all sorts of reptiles, or understand what our wives, children, and mothers go through. No one looking at the completed building realizes the sacrifice that was put into it. That is, I'm going to move on from there. Let me, historian Walter Lacour wrote, no one doubted that the Arabs had benefited from Jewish immigration. Their numbers had almost doubled between 1917 and 1940. Wages had gone up. The standard of living had risen more than anywhere else in the Middle East. This is historian Walter Lacour. Now, mind you, remember this, that it was during this time, especially in World War II, that Haj Amim al-Husseini, the Palestinian Arab leader, the Grand Mufti, was meeting with Adolf Hitler in Germany, and he recruited men to join what was known as the Arab League for the destruction of the Jews. This is before the Jews were a people group. This is before Israel, when I say people group in their own land, this is before Israel became a nation again. And they weren't even surviving. They had just literally come out of World War II as a destroyed people, almost totally destroyed. 1/3 of all Jews were destroyed. And they're a threat to the Muslim world. Where should they go? And of course, Haj Amim al-Husseini was working alongside of Hitler. There are pictures of him. You can find that on the internet, no problem at all, developing his Arab League for the purpose of destroying the Jews and making sure that they did not have a chance to survive as a people group. Some Arab leaders in Palestine became increasingly hostile to the Jewish community. Many affiliated with the rising Nazi movement incited violence and instigated mob attacks against the Jews, 1920, 21, 29, 36, and 39. The British violated the mandate that they promised to the Jewish people, that they would have a land of their own to come into. In response to the Arab protestations, they repeatedly restricted Jewish immigration and land purchases as anti-Semitism mounted in Europe. Of course, many ships were turned away. I will read a little bit about that in a while. Jews were turned away when they came to Florida from Germany, and then Cuba, and they ended up having to go back and died, every one of them. They were turned away from America as well. We were guilty as well. They repeatedly restricted Jewish immigration in what was known as the White Pages. The land purchases as anti-Semitism mounted in Europe. These policies doomed hundreds of thousands of Jews who otherwise could have reached safety in Israel. I'm not going to call it Palestine, which had been established in part to serve as refugees for persecuted Jews. I want to find a quote by Mark Twain, if I can find it specifically. Let me see if I can find that quote. If I can't, I'll bring it up tomorrow. Please give me 1 second. Oh, well, let me read this, and if I don't find it, this will do. During the last 2 or 3 generations, the Jews have recreated in Palestine a community. The community has its own, has its town and population. I'm sorry, my eyes aren't focusing. Has its town and country population, its political, religious, and social organizations, its own language, its own customs, its own life. The Churchill or British White Paper, June 1922. The British government was impressed by the reality, the strength, and the idealism of this Zionist movement. It recognized its value in ensuring the future development of Palestine. The interim report on the civil administration of Palestine to the League of Nations. It goes on and on and on, declaring the benefit of the Jews moving back to their land and establishing the land of Israel as a place where people, Jews and Gentiles, prospered alike. The Jews wanted to live in peace. Nobody else wanted to live alongside of them in peace. So we see right now, very, very briefly, here's the quote. Please bear with me. This is in 1898. He says, "The Greeks and the Romans are gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burnt out. The Jews saw them all and survived them all. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All forces passed, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?" I'd say it's the Lord. No, as we say in Yiddish, no. We believe the Lord is and continues to have his hand on the nation of Israel. And I'm not declaring everything that the Jewish people do is perfect. I know my people. We're as human, as frail, and sin as much as any other people. Right now, Tel Aviv is a bastion of homosexual sin. And I declare it, and I will not hide or ever wince at the idea of declaring sin. I think Tel Aviv is declared as one of, if not the most gay-friendly city in the world. I know it's at least declared as one of, and that's a sin. And the Jewish people have always paid a price for their sin, just like everybody else. But the Lord has an ideal for Israel, and that ideal is that he will establish his kingdom there. We'll talk about this later on, not today, because I'm going to shorten this up. It talks about this in Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 2 and Micah 4 and other passages. We'll all go to the mount of the house of the Lord, to Jerusalem, and we'll say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He's going to establish his kingdom. He's going to establish, and it'll be him. It will not be us. We're not going to bring peace on this earth. There is no kingdom now mentality we're going to bring God's righteousness to no, we preach the word to individuals. Individuals come to Messiah, and individuals change. We do not change the world. The Lord changes the world, and it will not fully be realized until the Messiah is on this earth, reigning for 1,000 years, establishing his kingdom and reigning from Jerusalem. All right, so we've covered a lot today, and I think I'm going to end here. I'll end with this one quote from this paper. I hope this gives you some insight. Again, there's many, many more things that we could deal with, and maybe I'll do a section on the historical aspect, because I do want to touch on the biblical, and I also want to touch on the aspect of what Islam says about the Jews and about the destruction of the Jewish people. And so there's a lot to cover in there. But I wanted to at least give you more of a foundation modernistically and let you realize that there is no justice, there is no desire for Islam to live in peace alongside of the Jews. This is from, ready? I can't even say the word. A Jesuit father, Michael Nod, on his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, 1674. This is a that's a hard word. A Jesuit father, because remember, there's always been a Jewish presence in the land. Jews prefer being prisoners in Jerusalem to enjoying the freedom they could acquire elsewhere. The love of the Jews for the Holy Land, which they lost, is unbelievable. That says a lot. All right, I kept it short, at least as short as I'm able to. Be blessed. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this is helpful to you. I'd like some comments. This will also be on our YouTube channel. We just started a brand new YouTube channel. It's called Messianic, that's one word, JewTube, JEWTUBE, Messianic JewTube. I'll be posting this on there as well, and so it will be there for all to view. You can see it on I will get this out on our Facebook page as well, and I'm starting to post this also at our website, themessianiccongregation.com, themessianiccongregation.com. Have any questions? Feel free to shoot me an email at rabbi@themessianiccongregation.com, rabbi@themessianiccongregation.com, or you can call me at 508-944-7393, and I'll be happy to have a conversation with you and answer your questions. We do this for nothing and no other reason than we want to lift up the name of the Lord and his Messiah and help people understand the Jewish roots of their faith so that we can help put meat back on the bones of their theology. Okay? Shalom uvracha Yeshua. Peace, blessings in Yeshua the Messiah. And we'll see you hopefully soon. I'll let you know to the best of my ability when we're on next. Shalom.